Every year, the less capable fly anglers look forward with eager anticipation to an event known as Duffer's Fortnight, which takes place in May as the trout gorge themselves on emerging mayflies and spent mayflies, and even the least capable rod stands a chance of landing a fish. And whilst I'm not fishing for trout, I am in fact fishing for tench. A similar phenomenon takes place at this pond, and throughout the winter months the water is very clear, and you walk around and it's easy to believe that you can see every inch of the bottom, but you rarely see a fish. And then as the daylight hours extend and the water temperatures rise, somewhere deep down in nature a switch flicks on and suddenly the water is alive with tench. And even people of such limited ability as myself stand a chance of looking good, at least for a day or two. And you can see it hasn't taken very long to hook the first fish. The sun isn't even above the trees yet. And there's something very special about the tench. I don't know whether it's the colour, or the teddy bear eye, or the paintbrush tail, but there's something very endearing about them, and they fight very hard for their size. They tend to fight in surges. Now, historically, they're known as doctor fish. And I think it's a bit of a myth, but it's said that when other species of fish are sick, they'll rub themselves up against the thick slime on the flanks of a tench, and it heals their ailments. I've never seen a fish do it, and I've certainly never tried it myself. But fishing would be nothing without its stories. And this fish was giving a very good account of itself. The first tench of the season. Staying down deep. Not that it's particularly deep, I'm up at the shallow end here. So there's not a huge amount of depth, but it was boring around in the silt. Until eventually it slowly tired, and I managed to bring it to the net. A grand way to start my spring fishing. Beautiful tench, deep bodied, and as I said, the paintbrush tail looks superb in the early morning sunlight. Very pleasing indeed. Now I'm fishing with a mixture of stewed wheat and sweet corn, and it looks pretty haphazard, my baiting here. And this is the stewed wheat. It's a particular favourite of mine, and because one of the great things you can do with it is during the stewing process you can introduce any sort of water soluble ingredients and give yourself an extra edge, whether that's salt or sugar or treacle or molasses, stock cubes. I mean, the list goes on and the options are endless. I'd also bought a ledger rod. I didn't hold out much hope. I was putting that slightly off the baited spot because there were a few carp mooching about as well, and I didn't think they'd be quite brave enough to come right up in the shallows, but there's always a chance of one on the periphery. So this was a bit of a sleeper rod with a good old bottle top indicator. It's one of my newer cane rods, although I acquired it second hand, but it's paired with probably my oldest reel, which is a Alcock's aerial from probably around the 30s, I'm not sure. But really I was there to concentrate on my float fishing, because as I say, the tench are feeding with particular vigour this early in the season, and it's a good opportunity to kind of get your eye back in, make a few mistakes, and hopefully sort of sharpen your technique, ready for when the fishing gets a bit harder later in the season. But as I say, you probably saw I was a bit haphazard with the baiting, and this is a tactic or a technique or an approach, whatever you might call it, that I've used to good effect. I found if you bait very, very tight for bottom feeding fish such as carp and tench and crucians, they do tend to hold directly on the spot, and they'll inhale and exhale your hook bait, and it can be quite difficult to get an indication. Whereas if you spread the bait about, they're always eating and moving, and as they move, so you see the bites clearer. Obviously in the winter, or if you're fishing in mid-water, then you want to focus your baiting on one particular spot. But when the fish are active, I find it a great way of getting more bites. And it also, it doesn't, if you bait an entire area, you'll have fish feeding all over that area rather than spooking everything off one particular spot and having to wait a length of time to build it up again. And this was the second fish, another cracker, deeper chested this one, darker in colour as well. Very kindly putting his dorsal fin up for us. They are fantastic fish. I was getting a little bit confident at this point and starting to get a little bit comfortable. There did seem to be quite a few fish moving about and coming in and out of the bay where I was fishing, which is right up towards the shallows. It's not the deepest area of the lake, as I said, but there was certainly fish moving about and a good few bubbles coming up, which is always encouraging. Nothing says tench more than little pinprick bubbles hitting the surface. And because I've baited up across the area, I can sort of move about, react to the feeding as I see it. There's a fish feeding pretty much straight out in front of me. And I missed it. But as I say, this is the time to make the mistakes, early in the season, when you know you're going to get some more chances. There's a few geese flying about and landing, but this is the time to practice, because you know that you're going to get another chance soon after, or hopefully get another chance soon after, as was the case here. And this was a different kind of a fight with this fish. Probably it was clearly not as deep. It was a faster moving fish, which is often an indication of a smaller fish, but it was still putting up a very good fight. And it was still a worthwhile adversary, that's for sure. I'm fishing fairly heavy, I suppose. I mean, I'm a 6 pound line straight through, size 10, size 12 hook, I think, in this instance, with the float overshotted as normal and fishing it in a kind of lift style. So not super heavy, not super light. And the main difference with this fish is it was a male fish, and you can tell that because if you look at the pelvic fins, they're much bigger. There's a heavy ridge of muscle that runs above them, and they have these big spoon-like pelvic fins. What they're for, nobody's quite sure. It's been suggested it's to clasp the female or to cover the eggs, but I don't know. I'm not sure that anybody does. And the local duck posse made a move and came through, and I missed another one. I felt that one as well, so and I could actually see that fish, and it was a better fish. Maybe not the biggest, but better. But again, practice makes perfect. Although I'm baiting up with a mix of corn and wheat, I am just using a single grain of corn on the hook. If fishing was slower and harder, I might well change to wheat. I've had some good success with that as a hook bait, especially for roach and occasionally crusions when they're about. By now the sun was getting high in the air, and I got above the trees. It's casting quite a nice ray down on me. It was getting quite warm actually, but what it did do is it highlighted how shallow and how silty the area in front of me is. And this fish, when I hooked it, was kicking up great plumes of silt. And experience tells me that once the sun gets to this height, the feeding time is starting to wane. You can see a great mushroom cloud of silt spreading out across the lake. It was another good fish that was doing its utmost to bury itself at my feet, and it was turning into a very, very pleasant and productive morning's fishing. Certainly not a bad way to start my spring campaign. And the interesting thing about this fish is I noticed as soon as it broke the surface is it had different coloration, and I don't know whether this is almost it's not a golden tench, but it was a very gold, orangey gold belly. And that's another interesting thing about the tench here. They can, certain times of the year they're almost black, and other times they're quite light coloured. Normally it has to do with water clarity, but every fish I'd caught today was a slightly different colour, and this is a beautiful golden olive, and probably close to 5 pounds, I would imagine. And a lovely way to finish my morning, where even the challenged might succeed.